Hi, I'm Kim Wright, a teacher and digital technology specialist at Toowong State School in Brisbane. I work with students from prep to year 6 and support staff across our school through coaching and e-curriculum leadership. I'd like to welcome you here as school leaders and aspiring leaders who are seeking to make a difference, not just in student outcomes, but in staff wellbeing, culture, and connection. This presentation brings together some of the most powerful ideas that I've encountered through my postgraduate studies in educational neuroscience. Ideas that have reshaped how I teach, lead, and collaborate. I'm sharing them today not as abstract theory, but as practical, people focused insights that can support our work in schools. Let's start with a quick definition. Neuroscience powered leadership, or neuroleadership, is a term coined by David Rock, and it simply means applying what we know about the brain to how we lead, how we support others, communicate, make decisions, and manage change. In schools, this knowledge is vital. We don't lead systems, we lead people, and people bring their whole brain into every interaction, their motivations, fears, emotions, and habits. Neuroleadership helps us respond to how people actually think, feel, and behave, aligning with what Tokuhama Espinosa describes as the integration of mind, brain, and education science. It allows us to lead with empathy, evidence, and intention, especially in complex, people centered environments like schools. One of the most grounding ideas in this space is Louis Cozolino's view of the brain as a social organ, one that's wired for connection, trust, and safety. In fact, the brain is constantly scanning for social signals, and I do mean constantly. Like Cozolino, Lieberman explains that our brains are literally wired to connect, and this social wiring is as central to our survival as food or shelter. At the same time, Porges describes the concept of neuroception, the brain's unconscious ability to detect threat or safety in our environment. This scanning for social signals and threats can happen up to 5 times per second, triggering either a protective or a receptive state. So, whether we're giving feedback, introducing change, or simply starting a meeting, the emotional and relational tone we set matters more than we often realize. Brains in threat don't learn, but brains in trust can thrive. David Rock's SCARF model offers a helpful framework for understanding how our leadership behaviours either reduce or elevate that sense of social threat. It focuses on 5 key domains: status, how do I compare to others in this space? Certainty, do I know what's happening or expected? Autonomy, do I have any control or choice? Relatedness, do I feel connected and included? And fairness, am I being treated justly? What I've found helpful is using SCARF not just in leadership planning, but in the moment to reflect on how a conversation might land. For example, giving someone input into how a change is rolled out increases autonomy. Naming a timeline reduces uncertainty. Even something as small as checking in before launching into discussion can build relatedness. SCARF gives us a shared language for emotional safety, and, as Rock, Jones, and Weller note, applying these domains during feedback can significantly increase trust, engagement, and performance. We often hear that leadership should be calm and rational, but neuroscience reminds us that emotion is always in the room. As the saying goes, there is no cognition without emotion. As mentioned, the amygdala, our brain's early warning system, is constantly watching for threat. When triggered, it floods the brain with stress hormones like cortisol, narrowing focus and reducing problem solving capability. This is what we sometimes call an amygdala hijack. The antidote is awareness. Leaders who can name emotion, normalize it, and offer space for regulation Help others stay within their window of tolerance, where learning, thinking, and growth can still occur. Dr. Dan Siegel calls this naming it to tame it. And as Howard Jones reminds us, emotional regulation is essential to learning, a fact that's still too often overlooked in policy and practice. One of the most hopeful discoveries in neuroscience is the concept of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and rewire itself through experience and effort. As leaders, we're in a unique position to influence the environments that support or hinder that growth. Every time we frame feedback constructively, offer meaningful challenge, or celebrate progress over perfection, we're reinforcing the belief that people can grow. This doesn't just apply to students, it applies to staff too. I've found it transformative to shift from phrases like, they're not tech savvy, to, they're still building confidence. It's a subtle shift, but it reframes our leadership stance from judgment to encouragement. And that makes all the difference. This aligns with the Queensland Brain Institute's view of the brain as remarkably adaptable, shaped by repetition, experience, and social interaction. Leadership can be emotionally charged. We manage pressure, competing demands, and the expectations of others, sometimes all at once. That's why mindfulness matters. Not mindfulness as a buzzword, but as a practice of presence, regulation, and self awareness. Taking a breath before a hard conversation, pausing before reacting, reframing a challenge before we absorb it as a personal failure. Dr. Siegel's mindful breathing techniques reminded me that the breath is always available, not just for ourselves, but as a co regulating force for others. Calm is contagious. Cozolino suggests that emotionally attuned leadership strengthens neural integration, supporting regulation and learning in relational systems like schools. The more we model that, the more we lead from a centered place. So, what does brain aligned leadership look like in practice? Here are a few simple, actionable strategies for you to implement at ground level. Use the SCARF model when planning feedback, team meetings, or communication during change. Start key meetings with a moment of gratitude, mindfulness, or connection to regulate the social brain. Frame feedback and professional conversations around effort, not fixed traits. Support staff well-being by promoting sleep, movement, and recovery, not just productivity. Talk openly about the brain with staff and students to normalise learning, setbacks, and growth. When I began studying neuroscience powered leadership, I was curious, not just about neuroscience, but about how we might use it to lead better, connect more deeply, and support others in meaningful ways. I've come to see leadership as a deeply human practice, not just about strategy or systems, but about safety, story, and shared purpose. And I've learned that the most effective leaders aren't those who know everything, but those who create the conditions for others to grow. That's the promise of neuro leadership, and that's the kind of leadership I want to be a part of. Thank you for listening. Let's keep learning, leading, and growing with the learning brain in mind. Feel free to contact me via email on the address on the slide. If you've enjoyed this presentation and are interested in pursuing the topic further, here are a few references that you might find interesting.